Okay, so I thought I would introduce myself to start with so that we all know who I am. I used to work at the British Humanist Association a few years ago, from 2008 until about 2011, where, amongst other things, we ran the Atheist Bus campaign, which I will mention later, and I was head of membership and promotion. I now work at the International Humanist and Ethical Union, of which IHEO, the International Humanist and Ethical Youth Organization, is our youth section. And in between times, I was working in Uganda with the Uganda Humanist Association for a year. So I have worked for a national organization in Northern Europe. I've worked for a national organization in Eastern Africa, and I've worked for the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Professional humanist. Okay, today I'll talk very briefly about IHEU to begin with. Then we'll have a big group discussion and workshop on what we mean by growing humanism, what are our challenges and ideas for growing humanism. And then if we finish in time, if we have enough time, then I'll talk about a case study of a program that we ran when I was at the British Humanist Association and how we used that to grow the organization. So first of all, introducing IHEU. It's the sole global democratic federation of humanist, atheist, rationalist, secularist, skeptic, laïc, ethical, cultural, and free thought organizations. I think you can really tell when a tagline is decided by committee. In this case, an international committee. We've got the French word laïcité in there, like. This is Planet Earth. IHEU was founded in 1952 in Amsterdam. We're registered in New York City as a non-profit. We're headquartered in London, where we have 2 staff. And there's a staff up there in India. We had some staff in India until recently, and we're currently kind of restructuring staff. And we're represented at the United Nations in a number of different places. I'm not going to talk about that today, but it's a really important part of the work that IHEU does on the humanist policy agenda on the international stage, at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, at Geneva on the Human Rights Council, at the United Nations in New York. So really significant work there. The executive committee and the whole way that IHEU is run is democratic. So the big national member organizations, or any national member organization, will vote up and nominate people to be on our executive committee to run IHEU. So often they're people who've been involved professionally in humanist organizations or who are nominated by those organizations, and they are elected at the General Assembly every year. So truly we're the only democratic global humanist organization. IHEO, as I mentioned, is our youth section who became reincorporated into IHEU in the last few years. And I'm just marking up on the screen there as well places where we've run events or sponsored conferences and events in the last couple of years. So you can see there's a good spread of events, conferences like this that IHEU has supported just in the last few years. And we have 100 member organizations in more than 40 countries there on the map, and the circles represent the size of the number of member organizations, but they don't represent the size of the populations. We have 12 member organizations in India, as you can see, but they're huge because some of those have tens of thousands of individual members, but obviously very well represented in Europe, the United States, but also across a lot of the world. We've been working a lot on South America recently and Africa. But obviously it's very, very difficult to get formal humanist and secular organizations into places like the Middle East and North Africa, where it's often illegal to form a humanist organization. So we're helping groups grow, some of those groups with funding and training and direct assistance. We represent humanism in our policy agenda at the United Nations. We work towards our policy agenda through media and talks and other resources, and a big one of those in the last few years is the Freedom of Thought Report, which is something we've now put out 3 times. It covers every country in the world, and I'll talk about that a bit later. We bring humanists together for conferences like this, and I think IHEO knows how important they are for sustaining youth activity, but in general as well. I mean, all the work that I did in Uganda and all the work that is done there by several different humanist organizations all really happened after IHEU had its 2004 conference, its General Assembly for that year in Kampala. So a small group of local humanists said, hello, we're in Africa, we're in East Africa, come here and have your General Assembly. And IHU took the quite brave decision, I think, at the time to sort of say, yeah, okay, we'll come and have our big conference for the year in Kampala. And that really spurred on and catalyzed the activity that they wanted to do. Yeah, we're funded by the membership fees and our members and donors, and that's it. So when you're supporting as a youth movement and helping to grow national organizations in Europe, those organizations affiliated to IHEU are supporting and funding the work that we do. I'm going to talk next about this subject of our workshop. I was asked to talk about growing humanism, and specifically growing humanism in Eastern Europe, but obviously there are lots of lessons that are general that we can share wherever we are. I want it to be a discussion. I don't think we should break into groups or anything like that, like you often do in a workshop. I think we're a large group, but sizable enough that we should just be able to have kind of an open talk about some of these issues. So if we're talking about growing humanism and making it bigger, whatever, first of all, here's a practice question. What are we talking about when we talk about humanism? So what is humanism composed of? What are its elements? Anyone? You can be wrong. And I mean really basically. So let's start the discussion. Yeah? Humans are equal. Okay, that's good. So we have this idea of equality. What else sort of connected with that? Mm-hmm.
Your values are not based on dogma.
Not based on dogma, yeah.
Like the free thinkers, the secularists, the agnostic, the rationalists.
Okay, so there's a big scope of other beliefs and other elements that come in. Oh yeah? Okay. You're going to be a mic stand?
Yeah.
That's good. What was it you said? Not based on dogmas. Okay, sorry, okay, I'll do it, yeah. Look, I can, oh no, it won't stand up. So there's some things, so yeah, and someone mentioned, so we've got all these other elements that we mentioned in the tagline of IHU. So there was rationalism, so I guess that's a more general version of not basing your morality on dogma, not basing anything on dogma. Free thought and free inquiry. Pardon? Science.
Critical thinking.
Yeah. It's okay. Okay, freedom of thought. And science. Okay, that's good. We have a good list. We're okay. We're talking about the same thing. That's good. Mistakes could otherwise be made. So we're talking about a worldview that treats people equally and with equality. Is based on human rights. That certainly drives a huge part of the IHEU agenda and work. We're talking all the time about freedom of thought and belief, freedom of expression, and so on. Non-discrimination, that those rights should apply equally to everyone. Helping other people, quite general. Not based on dogma, this rationalism, naturalism, science. Free thought and freedom of thought. So yeah, ability to be non-conformist, step outside of the bracket, but also that different views will be respected. So freedom of thought means that people will come at things from a different angle, and there'll be people who really like some elements of humanism and not others, or reprioritize them in a different way. Okay, so what do we mean by growing then? If we're growing humanism, what does that mean? I mean, it's difficult to, you can't just count the members of an organization, right? That's part of it. But what else? What does it mean to grow humanism? What's the end game?
To develop the idea even further.
to develop the idea further. Cool, I like that.
Public support.
Okay, public support.
Some things can be measured. The number of countries that support and agree with the human rights. Raising the awareness of society.
Okay, so social awareness of humanism and the various things that come with it, I guess.
Rather say humanist is like values, not like.
Okay, so regardless of whether people actually say, I'm a humanist, or even buy into the broader thing, at least they share some of the same values, whether they're religious or whatever else. No one's talked about, like I've said, is it all about the numbers? But so like numbers themselves, like the number of people in society who say, I'm non-religious or I'm humanist, or, so they don't have to use the word, but I guess that's the actual demography, like the statistics.
I was going to say people who don't believe in religion or lose their belief in religion and want to believe in something else, in something rational. It's also a negative one, but it's negative in the way that they don't believe anymore, but it's possible.
That's cool.
Maybe make people act on their values, like not be passive about protection.
Cool. Someone just said something about organization? Globalization, okay. So globalization, what, in the general kind of economic sense?
Working towards recognizing that we are all humans and that like a type 1 civilization, no country, no borders, working together and less recognizing human values.
Okay, good.
Yes, John Lennon, basic stuff.
Excellent, okay.
Increasing tolerance towards minorities.
Cool, so maybe as well,
And to provide a home for like-minded people.
okay, so so we've got things about people and society in general, but the actual like home for humanism, so NGOs, our humanist organizations, like ASUR and AUR. So they need to be strong. I guess as well, like, and relating to that last point is going to be like our capacity. So there might be lots of humanists starting to come into the movement, or people becoming more secular in society at large. But there's also something about maybe our capacity to change things. Like, do we have a public affairs team in a country that's working on kind of policy issues that humanists tend to agree on and share? So something like public policy capacity, our capacity to change things. Media presence, yeah. So I guess that's related, but slightly different from this as well. And something, yeah, you can measure. Count the articles, count the column inches that you get. Pardon? Okay, so we're saying it's not all about the numbers per se, but that's part of it. Something about developing the idea further. So, like, I like that. So I didn't really think about that in advance. So growing it in the sense that there's a growing understanding of humanism. Yes, got it. And our understanding of it itself, like as a philosophy, like which things are integral to it or intrinsic to it, and which things are merely kind of incidental and don't necessarily come. Pardon? Yeah, I like that. I'm going to stick with develop because I've switched back to the presentation, but I like it. Public policy capacity, our ability to make change, and our media presence and visibility related to that. The number of countries that support human rights and secularism in general, I guess. Is there broad public support? is there some sort of education? So I guess we have some countries where there is a general understanding of like non-religiosity and secularism and humanism, and there are countries where there's very little understanding, or where taboos kind of come in on top of that. Demography, secularization in general. So if you do the census, how many people say they're non-religious? How many actually actively put something like atheist or humanist in that box? Is that even possible in a country? Would be another measure, I guess. So this is the actual demography of the numbers, but then in some countries in the world, you can't even do that. In Indonesia, you've got to pick one of 6 religions, and that's it. You can't say you're an atheist. So I guess that would be a sort of a measure of like the failure of the system to recognize. And that general level of, are we heading towards a sort of global civilization in some sense? And there we run into difficulties, right? Because people object and say things like your values aren't universal, or this globalism is oppressive. So you have to kind of try and work to kind of present views and values in a way that...
One barrier at a time.
Yeah, okay. One problem at a time.
Language first, communication. Let us see that we're not so different from each other, only we live thousands of miles apart.
Sure, sure. And I guess, but we also have stuff about like tolerance socially. So there's got to be some idea that there's got to be some kind of global agreement and consensus, and we like consensus on really key things like what is a human right or not, what values should a government and a society be working towards. But also, if we've got tolerance, that means we've got difference, we've got diversity. So I guess a humanist world, it would be weird if it was completely homogenous and the same, and everyone had the exact same views. There's going to be difference around the edge. I think more Deep Space Nine than Star Trek Next Generation, I don't know. Okay, and is there a home for humanism? Do we have NGOs? Do we have humanist organizations? Are there people whose job it is to advance this? And there's going to be pros and cons to that, right? Like having organizations means there's people whose job it is to get stuff done, like IHU going to the UN, or the Romanian Humanists campaigning on making things change at the national level, changing education and so on. But we're humanists as well, so we don't like to be led around too much. So we want democratic organizations that are transparent and people can be part of them, I guess, and not feel like they're just being led around by the nose. Okay, so we want to grow humanism, but obviously that means a lot of different things. We're not just talking about one thing, like one metric, one number going up. So we need to understand the problems that we face, the challenges we have, like what are we actually trying to do with any individual action when we're trying to grow humanism. So what goals do we have? Like Emma introduced this thing of like SMART goals earlier. So when we're talking about an individual area, maybe it's increasing our public capacity, maybe it's increasing public understanding, just increasing our membership numbers at an organization. If we've got some goal that we're working towards and some plan to go towards it, we want it to be something specific, something measurable, something assignable. There's no point doing it if there's no one to actually carry it out. Why plan it? It's got to be realistic, and it's got to be time-bound, time-based. You've got to set some sort of deadline, and sometimes our deadlines are really far. Like there'll be some strategic goals that will be 5 or 10 years away or more. But hopefully if you've got goals like that, then you want lots of smaller goals underneath that will work towards them in a more organized way. And when we've got those goals, what are the actual programs that are going to meet and solve that? So I'll just talk now just a little bit about one of the projects from IHEU, where I think that we tried to identify a background problem at the global level, that we could produce a project, something that was deliverable, that could be measured, that we could see working to solve it. So the background situation that we were talking about is that we think that yes, there's some growing understanding around the world of organized humanism, of secularism, like the idea that people can be non-religious is something that is spread further than it used to be. Most signs of kind of global demographics show that in most areas there is more secularization than there was before. However, that very growth, that success, entails a backlash. We've seen a lot of problems, and the most recent Freedom of Thought report focused on, this is the president of Malaysia, who said last year that humanism atheism and liberalism was a threat to the state, it was a threat to Islam, so really sort of scapegoating humanists. This is the late King Abdullah, who early last year ratified a law that said atheism is terrorism, and so they adopted new terror regulations, and the very first line of the new Saudi terror regulations is, its first example of an act of terror is, and I quote, spreading atheist thought in any form. That's its first example of terrorism. So that's a really sort of serious kind of charge. And there's the supposedly secular President Sisi in Egypt, who last year said that too many youth are being influenced by atheism. The clerics said that we need a re-education program, that scary term, to turn the youth back and away from these atheist foreign ideas and back towards Islam. And we saw a really worrying combination of state and Islamic clerics and also Coptic Christians kind of joining in and saying, yes, this is a real threat to society, this growing atheism. And one cleric said there were 800 atheists in the country. Yeah, oh no, what a shock. Like, clearly a bizarre estimate, whatever that was based on. So that was just 3 examples where really high-profile leaders, heads of state, have like verbally attacked atheists as a group in the last year, and I think in a way that, you know, if it was certain other groups, we would clearly and immediately recognise it as hate speech, and yet it's just sort of not seen that way. It's not reported that way. I think if Sisi was saying the same thing about Jews, like we've got to re-educate the Jews and make them Islamic again, very clearly the West would be more concerned about dealing with the secular regime, right? There's other problems as well, so those were really kind of down-to-earth, like practical problems, but we also have some theoretical problems. Lots of people, like human rights experts, the people that end up influencing lawmakers and decision makers, are talking about religious freedom more and more, as opposed to talking about freedom of thought and conscience and religion and belief, or as opposed even to talking about freedom of religion or belief. So that's kind of a theoretical problem. It kind of occurs mainly in like the most high-level debates and discussions about human rights. But for us doing this work and trying to influence policymakers, it's a really big deal. Like Article 18, our human right to freedom of thought, conscience and belief has got sort of suppressed and reduced to freedom of religion or belief, and then reduced even further to freedom of religion or religious freedom, and then you've lost the thought, so you've lost political thought, you've lost secular thought, you've lost secular belief and philosophy. So religious freedom is a good thing if it's understood as part of this broader right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, and most of our work is based on that Article 18 right and the Article 19 right to freedom of expression, but we don't want to talk about it in this kind of redacted, diminished way. We want to recognise the totality of that right. And going back up to the kind of practical level, atheist views remain taboo or persecuted in many countries. So even when it's not the political leaders, even when it's not laws like in Indonesia saying you can't be an atheist, or in Saudi Arabia saying it's terrorism, you've still got social taboos. So even if your laws are perfectly good, if the whole country is against you, then that's obviously a problem. So our approach to some of these problems, not thinking that they're going to solve them all or make them go away, but a solution that kind of works towards addressing those problems, is this Freedom of Thought report. The introduction allows us to discuss theoretical issues, and this is a report that we've been putting out, sending to ambassadors, sending to diplomats, to human rights organizations. So it's about trying to get the argument in front of people that when you're making hate speech against atheists, you're violating a right in exactly the same way as you are if you're making hate speech against other belief groups. It has a country-by-country rating system. So every country in the world is getting assessed and reviewed and rated by IHU, by volunteers that help us write the report, and by our members who are working with us, writing reports on their own country, providing interns and volunteers that help us write reports on countries where we don't have members. And that allows us to give kind of some guidance to people working in that country. Like, they now have a report that says, these are the things you're doing that violate freedom of thought, conscience and belief for atheists. for non-religious people that are preventing people from identifying in that way. And these are the things you can change that will mean you get a better rating, so you won't get a really terrible rating anymore. So hopefully it's a resource. It also contains case studies on individuals being persecuted, which I think is really important. You can cover the legal stuff, but you also need to see individuals, so you can really understand and empathize with what actually happens to individuals who get persecuted, people who are in jail for creating an atheist Facebook page, or who have been sentenced to death for apostasy, like in Mauritania or Saudi Arabia. So we need to see those stories. Another element of the report then is, well, that's the report itself, here's what we're trying to do with it, but also we need to look at the other opportunities that we have with it. So our members, our member organizations, because we're an umbrella kind of structure, they can take the report away, they can use it to make submissions and make new contacts and new allies. So the Dutch humanists, for example, were the first group to really kind of take this up and say, we're going to take the report, meet ambassadors, not just send it to them, but like go out and meet them and get meetings that otherwise they wouldn't have got, where they can put pressure and influence on a country directly. So I've sort of talked about that already. It allows them to lobby the government in their own country. So if you're in a country where there are like serious things that our report has picked up, you can take the report and say, these are the things you need to change to get a better rating. These are why atheists are going, your country has got some bad laws. It allows them to link up with other groups. So if we're talking about human rights issues, then suddenly these groups can take our report and they can say, we're a member of this International Humanist and Ethical Union. We contributed to this report. Here's our report. We're a human rights organization concerned about human rights. So they can make links with other human rights organizations. They can also make links with religious organizations. We work quite closely with Christian Solidarity Worldwide, who are really good at freedom of religion or belief from that broad kind of Article 18 perspective that I was talking about. They recognize the totality of it in the same way that we do. They've worked with atheists like Alexander Ahn in Indonesia, who was jailed for expressing his atheism. So you can find alliances with groups like that. And of course, it's a public relations thing, and this brings us back to the growth of humanism, because you're able to make news stories out of the report. We emphasized this year this growing trend which the report identifies towards hate speech against the non-religious around the world, and lots of our member organizations were able to take that away and do media about it in their own country. And it's as simple as, like, we worked with our member organizations to produce a press release and then work with them again to kind of tailor it and add to it, so that a given country can go to its press and say, here was this international report that's released. The Swedish humanists or the Belgian humanists, we were part of that, and here's our comment on it, here's our thought, and maybe how it relates to the countries that you have the closest relationships with, the economic ties with. So it's a way of reinvesting the work to help grow the organization by growing its visibility, its media presence. Okay, so that was the problem situation that we were looking at in the world, or the particular set of problems, and a solution that we thought was going to help us work towards those individual problems. So what is the problem situation in Eastern Europe? And I guess, I mean, there's lots of people here from Europe, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe. So we're from all over. This was the title we had, but I think we should be prepared to treat this as what's the problem situation in Europe as a whole, but if we can kind of focus as well on Eastern Europe, problems that are specific or general is fine. So let's ask a few questions to try and dig into what the problem situation is. Is society secularizing already, or is it not? So someone speaking this morning said that they felt like there was demographic data showing that Romania was slowly getting more secular. It's difficult to measure. Not everything was attainable. Do people have a feeling about that? Do people know? Is there empirical research? Is Europe, or is Eastern Europe as a whole slowly secularizing or not? Okay, so our own perspective makes that difficult to measure when we're coming from a humanist organisation, or even if, like, a lot of our friends are humanists, and that's tempered where we're hanging out.
Yeah, we have a lot more information available, and lots of youth are using social media, etc. And from what I've seen, it seems like generations, their 20s and 30s, are a lot more secular, just like the round we had earlier, than the older generations. So I believe, yes, we are having in a change. We are getting more secular, and we are soon to be a generation that will also be in charge of the country. And I believe that's will be when we are seeing big changes.
Okay, good. Sorry, you first, because I pointed in that way first.
In my opinion, one of the problems in Eastern Europe is indifference. That's one of the reasons why secularism is growing so slow. Because humanists are, I don't know, 8-10%. Radicalism, fundamentalism is another 10%, but the rest is indifferent.
Okay, I think that's a really good point. Like, I can think, like, from my time at the British Humanist Association, when I was much more up on kind of national affairs, one of the sort of real frustrations was you could do surveys and talk to people in the streets, and you know that like 75% of the population agrees that there should be no state funding of religious schools. And when you talk to them about it and go, it's bad, isn't it? Like, the government's giving money to religious schools as if they were just fine, even though their admissions are discriminatory and they have exemptions from the curriculum and so on. And people agree, and they can get quite passionate about it. And yet, it's not a vote decider in the way that it may be for like a real churchgoer. Right, so there can be too much apathy, too much passivity, and it's not something that will actually make them change their vote. So it's not something that, or they maybe don't have the choice because all the parties are suggesting the same thing. So they feel like, well, it's an issue for me, but it's not one that can actually change my vote. Therefore, it's not one that actually changes the policies that are on offer. There was someone else.
I'm Romanian, so this would be my personal experience. I feel that young people, both non-religious and religious ones, manifest themselves stronger compared to their parents. Like, their parents, it doesn't matter if they were believers or not believers, they mainly kept it to themselves and not displayed this publicly. But younger generation, no matter if they're believers or not believers, manifest much more radically in their belief or their non-belief. Because I have seen in recent years, for example, in my city, anti-abortion campaigns, and that has been a premiere, like it never happened. But in the same time, I see that there are more and more secular and humanist people that are also having their projects. And so I think that, yeah, they're much more active.
Okay, that's good. So there's an opportunity there if people are being more radical on our side or more expressive on our side, but it's also a worry if everyone's just getting angrier and more passionate. Okay.
It's more polarizing, I guess.
Sure.
So I think kind of what I said goes against what you said.
Sure, but no, that's good, because it doesn't necessarily go against it. There's different countries in Europe, and there are kind of trends and counter-trends, and so there can be individuals, like if 10% of the population could be getting more expressive, more radical, more keen to speak, and 90% could be getting more apathetic. Like, that's not incompatible at all. And they're both different groups of people, so they're both different opportunities and different threats. Yeah?
I want to add to what Alka was saying. I think this is true for all Eastern Europe, not only for Romania. It's a post-communist effect. Like in the first decade after communism fell, it was sort of religious revival. And like in the last years, there is a humanist revival in Iran, the backlash against the religious revival. So this is how I see this thing. And about the previous phrase about radicalization, I think it's, from my experience as an owner of some Facebook atheist groups, there are a lot of radical atheists who reject humanism. So that's a problem between us.
Okay, so post-communist effect leading to revisionist revival, and I guess also like taboo against atheism, and that's something we might come back to under another slide. And then rejection of humanism per se, or
by radical atheists, especially those who are recently converted to atheism. So you have a tendency to be more militant when you just abandon religion.
Okay. So humanism, just like atheism, there's different flavors and different kinds of people, and you might get kind of like, you know, atheists can be, you can be a nihilist atheist at like the absolute extreme, and there's no point to human affairs or whatever. Then you're clearly not a humanist. So that someone like that would reject it, or someone who's very against any sort of, like we talked about, tolerance and humanist values and so on. So that would be a problem. Yeah.
This also ties into what previous speakers of the day said. They say, well, nowadays politicians reveal themselves in things of traditional families, traditional values, traditional Christianity. If you look at the 60s, or maybe it's hard to compare to the communist situation. But that's when things like sex and social issues became political. So politics stopped to be only about money, but started to incorporate things like family life, started to incorporate things like sexuality, became part of political identity. And now the opposition to that has emancipated. So now it's their turn to start using religion and the family and the homeliness as values in their campaigns.
Okay. Yeah, one more.
Getting a little bit back to the original question, I think that in measuring if society is secularizing or not, there is a big problem, which is that in different countries there is a secularized civil society but not secularized laws, and the other way around. And so maybe there are countries who are getting secularized, but for example, in the Freedom of Thought report, we get a low mark because of incoherent laws in respect of what the people believe, and that's the case of Italy, for example. So I think that's a problem in measuring how society, if society is getting secularized.
Okay, that's a good contribution. Yeah.
I just looked up the Wing Gallop and the Justice for
Data.
Because
Emma likes data. We've learned this today.
So Western Europe came up as one of the very least religious places in the world, with just 51% saying that they are not religious or commenced atheist, whereas Eastern Europe came out as 70%, like 71% saying that they are religious. So there's a lot of diversity within the continent.
Okay.
It's just from the press release, so I don't have the breakdown.
Okay, so I think you're right that we sort of stepped slightly outside of just talking about the numbers there, but we're asking, is society secularizing already or not? We think, yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Were you like this and I'm...
Yes, I would like to mention a very specific situation in Russia. And it is a very worrying turn, because from the beginning of the new millennium, the main general tendency was to integrate Europe, to adopt all these human rights and values of Europe. But just all of a sudden, in 2014, it made an opposite turn. And now Russia demonstrates their muscles, try to present itself as a superpower, and they try to color it with a religious or pseudo-religious terms. They try to present Russia as a country which wants to save Europe and the rest of the world from the sea.
Yeah, and we've just seen very recently, obviously, maybe beginning with Pussy Riot, there was that kind of real kind of pushback of a few people trying to make a kind of secularist argument, getting really badly kind of pushed and suppressed down. And I saw last week or the week before, having had so many, from a human rights perspective and a secular perspective, people have been criticizing Putin's relationship with Kirill and the Russian Orthodox Church really strongly, and then the Greek Prime Minister, who's openly, I think it was the Greek, is openly atheist, came and met with Kirill, and Kirill said, now you must remember that religion is not a political football. So real kind of hypocrisy there on the part of a church accused of, siding with the Putin regime. Okay, so that's an important point, this wider issue of the universal values of human rights and their interaction with some states who have turned opposition to them into a kind of nationalistic dogma, nationalistic push.
Well, it's also important to say they have a blasphemy law over there in Russia. And recently, 2 weeks ago, the director of the theater got fired in the face of that law.
Yeah, I think he actually, the court case was a local court case, and the theatre director was charged, went to court, and that was thrown out. And they said, this isn't blasphemy, this is stupid. And then the culture minister came in and said, but we're going to fire you anyway. So it moved from the local to the national level very quickly. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next sort of area in question, because we've been talking there about this generic question of how secular is society, but we've kind of touched on other questions as well. So another question that will help, what is, I mean, in a way we've already done this a lot, so what slows down humanism growing from country to country? Well, pardon? Clericalization. Good, okay, so places like Russia, where there is a sort of, and Serbia, okay. Think Russia, think Serbia. Pardon?
Bad education.
Bad education. Yeah, okay, very good.
Very secular states, because in the constitution it's written they are secular, but in fact they are not. So
until young people get power, it's the churches that are renovated, not the schools.
Say that again, sorry.
Until young people come to power, it's the churches that are renovated, not the schools.
Okay, so there's a generational issue, but we don't kind of just want to wait for everyone to die and then, okay, come up and replace them.
In some nations we're regarded as, or demonized, seen as people who worship Satan or whatever. No, it's true. Yeah.
Okay, and that kind of came up a bit in what I was saying before, and in Eastern Europe in particular, we've got this post-communist kind of conflation and connotation of atheism with communism. I think it's quite interesting as well. You can compare what the guy from Accept Romania was saying about how gay people are perceived and how the non-religious are perceived, and that's obviously not just true in Eastern Europe, but most of Africa, South Asia and stuff, like to varying degrees, of course, but a huge problem. And very often you can compare like the LGBT rights situation and the atheist rights situation. It's just that, in a way, the latter is still smaller. It's not talked about and recognized as much. There's so many hands up now. Yeah?
Growing and internationally organized opposition.
Yeah. This is something we face really badly at the United Nations, where you've got now huge coalitions of groups all campaigning on family values and so on, and saying, oh, it's all about the family, when actually all they mean is we hate gay people. And they just keep bringing that same argument. Yeah. Yep. I'm duplicating these slides when I'm deleting everything, by the way. I'm not just writing it down really temporarily and then getting rid of it. Yeah.
Again, maybe this situation is specific for Russia, but I feel that we don't know how to run our organization efficiently. This is sort of a poor management, because this idea of self-organization is not a part of our culture. We just in a situation when we need to learn it or relearn it again.
Okay, I like that. I think there's some, so in particular, cultures, maybe that, like civil society, just running a civil society organization is already difficult. But then we've also got the kind of, the sort of free thought, non-conformity problem. The fact, you know, people say it's difficult to herd cats. We're rationalists. We don't like to be led around. So that can be a problem to kind of setting up and running groups. For where? For Malta. Okay. Cool. And I think IHEU's in Malta next year. Our General Assembly is in Malta next April, May, along with the European Humanist Federation. But like, there's been a lot of huge successes in Malta recently. You've got rid of, like, you've legalized divorce and now same-sex civil partnerships within the space of like 3 years. Like, incredible kind of social change. Of course, it's not all you. Yeah, I wasn't bigging you up completely. Yeah, at the back.
Yeah, I would say postmodernism, because it's important humanist values, which is truth, objectivity, rationalism, and they frame as very Western imperialistic values and put in a bad light.
Okay. Leonard.
Yeah. I think that in the Netherlands, we don't get to kick, against the church that much anymore, because we're already a pretty secularized country. But therefore, we're less visible. We've got less to fight against. And that actually poses a problem to
I hear you really clearly. Keep it, okay, fine. Yeah, yes, you.
The lack of awareness in the general population, they don't know the idea.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. In the Norwegian Humanist Youth Organization and with the Norwegian Humanist Association, we had a problem about being like an anti-Christian organization. Yeah. Because we're always kicking on the church. Leonard's talking about he wants something to kick, but you're not promoting the life of your humanism by doing so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's a really important problem, because I've seen a lot, like, that often gets discussed is the campaign phrased too negatively, and often the kick side of that, and I think we often don't recognize it as the reverse of it, is that often when people do try and talk about things in very positive terms, it gets very wishy-washy. It can be quite, you go like, we're against discrimination and for this, and very often when you're trying to be positive, the first thing people do is say like, yeah, so what do you actually mean? What are you actually going to want to do? And then you go, I'm against religious funding for faith schools or something.
Yeah, and the thing about doing so that of course you get new members, join the organization, but you have not members who want to, and after a while, you need more people, and you need to promote something that more people also recognize.
Cool, okay, that's good, yeah.
Also things like the blasphemy laws that some countries want to pass, and that's also a strong connection to fear, because single people want those blasphemy laws because they're scared that there will be more terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
I think a failure to provide something that kind of only religion provides in many parts of society.
Warm touch.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not looking far enough.
Lack of project and lack of funding.
Lack of project funding. Or resources and capacity in general, I guess. Yeah, I can definitely sympathize with that. All right, I'm going to move us on. We've got 3 pages of what slows down humanism growing now, so that's pretty good. So let's keep this one shorter, I think. Problem situation in Eastern Europe. And maybe let's make this one more specifically about Eastern Europe and hear from people who are just in Eastern Europe a bit. What institutions, organizations, and people are actors in this situation? So I'll start us off with a really obvious one, is the Orthodox Church. Who else? What else? What else is happening? Is that it? The Orthodox Church together with the government.
Yeah, because the church gets votes for the government.
How are we supposed to not kick the church when they're shoving their ass in every aspect that you want to kick? Be it education, healthcare, government, human rights, they're against anything and everything. So what are those family values? It's all meta, it's all holy, but what is holy? It's a non-existent entity that they give to each other, and for some reason it gives them rights.
The educational system, or whoever is in charge of it.
Okay, so one of the players is the education system itself, independent of the government, because the government can change the education system, the curriculum, and so on can all persist.
Also, maybe it's weird to call them actors, but I'm thinking of people that actually don't act. So, for example, all the people who are atheists, but they still stay in church because they're too lazy.
Okay, back to the apathetic thing, yeah. That's good. Okay, so some sort of, so we're talking here about the actors, so I guess particular resources, so maybe some of that, so well I guess, so an actor we haven't talked about is ourselves. We're an actor. Okay, are there any other major sort of players on the scene in Eastern Europe? Football fans, okay. Because it's Eastern Europe. Okay, good. I don't know where to put that. I've gone off the bottom of the screen. I'm going to leave that out. Sorry. Okay, so what advantages and disadvantages do we have? So we've identified players. We've talked about like what's holding humanists back. So I guess we've already talked a bit about disadvantages. But like structurally, as organizations and as people, and given the situation we're in, where are we held back? So we've talked about public misunderstanding and taboo, persecution almost in some places. Yep.
Yeah, what I was also saying earlier in the videos, you make people active, you give videos, comments, messages, polls, etc. But you have only so much attention span, so you can push all of the messages, but the church is pushing messages, other activists are pushing messages. In the end, you end up liking it all, but you have no memory of it even, and you won't go to events or meetings because you're just so full in your social space.
Okay.
We are very individualistic, and we have big egos. And
we humanists and secularists.
Yeah.
Okay. He's calling you all individualistic.
It's much harder for us to work as a collective for common purpose than for Christians.
Organized like cats.
Okay, you know what? I think I've worked and talked with a lot of different people, and I think every group kind of thinks it's especially difficult to work in that group. And you know, Christians. I gave a talk at a university the other week, and there the Christian society had to split in two because it's a society that's about sort of 50% ethnic minorities at the university, and they had to split the Christian group in two because the ethnic minorities and the kind of white European and British population couldn't get on with them. So the ethnic minorities were complaining that they were kept out of leadership positions and stuff. So you know, it can be worse. But yeah, okay. So there can be a problem of individualism and like herding cats.
The less tolerant are using our tolerance against us.
I like that.
We are soft, basically, because we believe that if we are civilized, the others should be civilized. Well, the others don't think that way. They believe we should be uncivilized in a violent manner.
Tolerating
Cool. I've added resources again from the last slide. I'm going to move on. What threats and risks do we take? Like whatever we're doing, like what's potentially going to go wrong or badly wrong? Cool. Me personally? Okay, so at the political level, that's a possibility. Like at the political level. Pardon? You can go to jail.
For offending someone. Because your freedom of speech offends their feelings that are not a physical thing, but their freedom of speech can call upon someone who hurt physically someone, and it's basically not the same in their mind.
Yeah. And I think that's a very good point. In Bangladesh, so we're maybe not talking so much about Europe and immediately, but in Bangladesh in recent weeks, Abhijit Roy and Washika Rahman, two leaders of the sort of secular and free thought and atheist movement, have been assassinated by machete attack in the street. This morning in Pakistan, news broke that the woman that ran something called the Third Floor has been killed. She spoke recently about Balochistan and like independence, and she ran an open community discussion forum. We know that a lot of our contacts and friends in Pakistan are at actual, immediate risk to their life and limb. What else? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We could also go to hell.
There are people that lose friends and family when they openly confess.
Social ostracization.
Yes, you ostracize.
Cool. Yeah, ostracized. Oh, you might do. Okay. Anything else?
You're forced to do something that, like religious education. You're forced to listen to it even if you don't want to.
It's like ritual or religion.
Okay. I guess as well as a sort of there's the
You can end up like right, but
Yep.
Still, I mean, a lot of people lost their religion.
And this is the process of
I know that last year I was in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Yeah.
I think focusing on the risks that we can provoke as a group is getting, too political, in the sense that Christianity has proven that when a group with a certain set of values that cares for a certain group of people gets too much into politics, then there is a backlash for that group. So I think that yes, more active politics, but not too much, because, for example, in Italy we had 45 years of the Christian Democratic Party, and now the religious discussion is out of the political discussion, and that's something we don't want with human.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I'm going to move on to the next question. Okay, opportunities. What doors are open? What are the situations that we can actually just take advantage of because they're there anyway? None.
Most religions and values share the same values. So instead of just going against religious and non-religious people, you can actually work together for common cause.
Yeah. So I mentioned working with Christian Solidarity Worldwide. We work with people like Catholics for Choice at the UN as well. So we've got a risk from those organised blocks of kind of socially conservative religious groups, but also an opportunity of working with the more liberal groups or progressive groups that we be with anyway.
Legal mechanisms, because all the countries in Eastern Europe are subjected to the Convention of Human Rights, and stuff like that, and every state violation of secularism usually means violation of specific rights. So we have the international legal mechanism that
Excellent. Yeah.
I think we live in an age of technology where we can use those democratic tools instead of having to go through like publicly controlled media or something.
Yep. The biggest. Okay.
Maybe stars and politicians and other kinds of public persons that show their acceptance of society or show that humanism and
Okay, so well-known figures, leading politicians, for example, writers, scientists, people, humanitarians, people that will agree with us. Okay, I'm gonna move on. What solutions are we going to have then? We've talked about all these threats and opportunities. I realise this is a really broad, open question, but what are some things that we can do? So if I come up with a starting example is if you're in a country without an organisation, you might start a group or a project or an organisation. But I recognise that's obviously really vague. It fails on my targets of being specific and so on. But at least it's specific in a sense. But so what are things that we can do? And don't worry if we're already doing them. That's fine. Or if you think they're obvious, like let's just have some obvious thoughts and ideas before you think you have to be too imaginative. Yeah. Say again. Twinning. Okay.
Humanist Association for one country meets up with the Humanist Association of another country. We exchange our experiences, ideas.
Okay, that's great. That's something actually IHU's been. Yeah, that's really good. IHU's been looking at doing that, and we've been talking to Humanist Society of Scotland and one of the organisations in East Africa, Malawi. So Malawi have been running a big project. There's a historical link between Scotland and Malawi, and there you've got this disparity of a more established organisation and a less established organisation, but they're both doing work, they're both doing campaigning on various topics. So we're trying to set up a kind of twinning programme, and that's our prototype project. So I like that idea because we're already doing it.
More social engagements is more possible. Well, I'm speaking particularly about Belgium. When you have a non-profit organization that is, fighting for your, like for instance, legal clinics, where you can go for legal aid without any form of payment.
Okay, so providing some sort of public or social service or benefit.
No matter who you are, and you can still get some kind of help or some kind of support.
something like a flash mob, like a free section we did in Brussels, but just raise awareness and people get started and stuff like that.
Emma?
Social media to reach new audiences than awareness.
Publishing books for you, like with Croatia, with that children book, for children, and it's translated in so many languages, and now we are sending that book to humanist school in Africa, in Uganda, Catholic school. Some people maybe know it.
Excellent. So in a way, it's a publication, but it's also a resource. Yeah, it's been huge. Yeah, we. Excellent. Yeah.
So starting a local group with regular meetings. From my experience, many atheists need like a support group because they feel ostracized. So this can evolve in an organization later.
Yep.
Lead by example, and for example, start a blog to publish your thoughts. Be yourself and.
Okay, so yeah, I like that. Being yourself, not hiding who you are. If it comes up in conversation with someone, being honest. Yeah. Yeah.
Lobby the politicians for some secular or humanist issues regarding some topics.
Excellent. Yeah.
Martyr.
Martyr? You want to be a martyr? You say some random shit, Leonard. What?
Martyr. Like, to rally around.
Okay.
Not to be silent when someone breaks the right. Someone just
I like that.
even if you're viewed as an aggressive, at least let them know that you won't shut up. You won't decide. You won't let it pass for nothing.
Excellent. I like that. Don't stay sitting down when something's going wrong. Yeah.
Being that humanist can be a little bad for your love life, so I suggest that people start a humanist.
Excellent. I have not heard that before. All right. Yeah, that's good, because I often think in quite an organizational way, and actually individual activists and things often make the difference, make the change. Yeah.
Increase our approachability.
And what do you mean by that?
Often people are intimidated because they tend to hear about humanism in a very intellectual debate, while, for instance, if someone would walk into a philosophy class, you tend to be overwhelmed with information, and I think we tend to do that a little bit. So we can, profile ourselves in such a way. Yeah, not necessarily simplify it, but for instance, with us, we just put a picture of ourselves on our website, and our number of members quadrupled in 2 years. It really helps.
Remember to smile.
Like getting out of a closet, something like that?
Getting what?
Getting out of a closet?
Some way, yeah.
Kind
of, yeah. It is part of your identity, so...
Okay, that's good. All right, so there's a lot of ideas there. Some are more concrete ideas that are more specific. Some are more general. I want to wrap up this section and then really quickly rush through the third thing I was going to do, because we've got like 10 minutes left. I think it's important, if you've generated a list like that, and if you go through this process, and like anyone can take this presentation away, use some of the questions to try and formulate ideas. The first thing you're then going to have to do, if you've got a whole long list of stuff like this, is kind of prioritize them, think what's important, what can actually be done, what's most urgent. Like if one of your problems is the country's on the brink of revolution and then we need to work on that as humanists, then like if you were in like Hungary, or that you were facing like major kind of political crises, maybe that would be your thing to work on. But you've got to balance urgency and importance with realism and what you can actually work on in a kind of deliverable way. And then we've got, again, this smart idea of what the goals should be. So some of the ideas that we just had in that last section were more general. Being specific and saying, like, what are you actually going to do? Like, we do a lot of things like grant funding applications at IHU. So you'll get different projects from all parts of the developing world applying to funding from IHU to support the projects. And one of the things we try and make really clear on the application form is you've got to be specific. Like if your project is to empower people, that's good. But if there's no detail on what that means, then it's really sketchy. So avoiding kind of sketchy, vague terms, which can be good. Sketchy, vague terms are a good way of like thinking like strategically, what are our values, what do we want to do? But then when it comes to thinking of goals and the projects, you've got to get more specific. And again, making them measurable, and that can be loads of different things. Like if you have got links in with politicians, then there might be something really singular, like, yeah, we got that law passed. We helped, we lobbied, we were part of it, we were on social media talking about it, the organization got on the TV and supported the politician or so on. Then you've got one thing that's just on or off. The law passed or it didn't pass. That would be good, but then there'll be other measures as well, like how did it get talked about? What was the support for it? Like if it failed, how many people voted for it? Can you show progress over time? Assignable is about not planning for stuff that you actually can't do to some extent, but also to make sure that if you've got a detailed plan of like, yeah, we're going to produce a new publication, it's a book on humanism for children in this language or that language, or humanism in politics, whatever the project is. If you've got no one to write it or publish it, then your plan is sitting idle. Being realistic, because humanism is reality-based, and setting deadlines so that things just don't run and run. And that can be a huge problem, I think, especially within organizations, is that even whether you're working with volunteers or professionals, like sometimes things can just run and run because we've got limited capacity. You find that people have got their daily jobs and their daily things or their daily lives if they're just a volunteer to do, and that will get in the way of producing it. So I think often at a conference like this, we can get fired up and we know we want to go and change the world, and then it becomes really difficult afterwards because we haven't said, right, by that date, I'm going to have done this thing. Okay. So I was going to talk about this last thing. We don't have a huge amount of time, but I can probably rattle through it in the 9 minutes that are left. So I wanted to talk about a case study of something that was a project that was used to grow humanism in the UK. This was from my time at the British Humanist Association. It had a very simple proposition, which was, we want to put this message on the side of a bus, there's probably no God, now stop worrying and enjoy your life, and it only costs you £5. That's all it costs. So it was a nice, clear, simple proposition that if enough people gave £5, then that would happen. And famously, this attempt to raise a small amount of funds for the adverts got 2,791% of its target goal in, and then kind of spread around the world. So we've seen similar campaigns since, and they're not necessarily all directly inspired by or leaning on it, but certainly the Atheist Bus campaign in early 2009 was one of the things that has sort of prompted this like wave of other atheist and humanist organizations doing bus adverts and billboard adverts and poster adverts and so on. Aura? Yeah, so UAAR tried to run a campaign that was censored. A few other countries had censorship problems. Even the BHA tried to do a follow-up campaign, and they were denied permission to put the posters near trains. But they could put them on other places. So it hasn't worked everywhere, even though people have tried. But even trying was enough to generate some media coverage and a discussion about why that was the case. There's another one, why believe in God, it says on the Christmassy advert there. That's probably a bit small to see. And it's a huge campaign, and it's ridiculous. Sometimes you have no idea what's going to catch on and be big and go viral. The Atheist Bus campaign Wikipedia page is larger than the webpage for the entire International Humanist and Ethical Union, and probably for most individual humanist organizations. It got a lot of media attention. Richard Dawkins got involved, so that helped to up its kind of media friendliness. Fox News mocked atheists putting ads on buses when it went to the States, so it kind of played into the kind of culture wars in the US. So it had this huge influence, but it all began with a woman called Ariane Shireen, who in late 2008 said, I'm really sick of seeing all these religious adverts on the bus. So she wrote an article called Gimme 5, which was saying, look, if a whole bunch of us just got together and put £5 together, we could run an advert that said something a bit better and opposed these religious adverts that, I mean, they weren't nice religious adverts. They were linked to an organization that was threatening kind of hellfire and damnation. So it was very much a sort of response to a bad kind of religious proselytization that wasn't very nice. And she said, well, maybe we can come up with something a bit kind of more positive, but kind of funny. Like, she's a comedian as well. And there was some talk about this. Like, she just wrote an article and said, give me £5, everyone. But she didn't set up a mechanism for it. She didn't create a way of actually doing that. She just sort of said, wouldn't this be good? Wouldn't this be funny? But different bloggers started talking about it. The first person kind of suggested, like, there is no God, get over it, as a sort of different quote. So people started talking about the caption suggestion that she had, like mocking up buses with what it might look like if it was actually done. That was a blogger called John Worth there who set up this pledge bank. So he was like, let's actually do it. Let's create it. Everyone give £5. Pledge bank was a kind of early social media giving tool where you can say, I will give £5 if a whole bunch of other people will, and pile in. But this first attempt actually didn't work. So the Telegraph there, reporting atheists fail to cough up for London bus stop. The Telegraph doesn't like atheists very much. So they used this as a sort of way of bashing atheists and say, look, it didn't work. The pledge bank thing didn't work. Which I think, looking back at it, isn't that surprising? Like it's not a very pretty sight, pledge bank. It's the sort of thing that's been improved on a lot since then. So then John Worth came to the British Humanist Association, and the British Humanist Association got the Richard Dawkins Foundation involved. So suddenly it became an organisational thing, which obviously not every successful project has to be organisation-based, but in this case, we were able to bring in a designer and more publicity, get Richard Dawkins involved himself, because he's a distinguished supporter of the British Humanist Association, so whoever it was that was talking before about getting celebrities and big names involved, that obviously helped with the media for that. And suddenly we had a mock-up of what the bus would actually look like. That wasn't just, you know, black letters on a white background. It looked real. So this was a very organic, very democratic process. Although it kind of took organisations getting involved, even those organisations aren't exactly big corporate entities. So it never lost touch with the fact that this was just one woman's idea, and that one blogger thought, yeah, all right, let's do it. And then one small kind of fringe organisation said, yeah, we'll try it. So it remained democratic. It remained kind of transparent because we were able to talk about it. The media were interested in it. So it was never a black box. It was like, we'll try it, and it might not work. There was very little hidden agenda there. We didn't say, we're going to keep some of the money for some other purpose, for example. It was all just, you will give money, the ad will go on the buses. And it was kind of quirky. It was new, it was novel, and it was kind of a cheeky thing to do. So of those things, it being kind of plucky and cheeky and quirky and open, but also democratic, it involved a lot of technology. We were able to set up a blog for it in a matter of hours on WordPress, open source, completely free. Just Giving logo is the next one along there. They hosted the eventual donation system that you saw before, where it eventually got to £2,000. So you're paying them some portion of all that money that's donated, some small percent is going to them. But man, is it worth it if the technology works and holds up and people recognize it. It's a big thing in the UK. People have used it for lots of other, like usually smaller campaigns like sponsor your mate to do a marathon run or something. So people recognize it and trust it and are likely to give. So that was what happened. That was Ariam suggesting something. It didn't work at first, and then it did. So this was when it was launched as a media thing, when the organizations got behind and said, yeah, we're going to do this now. Not just the pledge bank, it's moving to Just Giving. Its web reputation went up. People started to talk about it. And then there was a launch day, and having already reported that this was going to happen, atheists are going to put ads on buses, then there was this incredible outpouring of donations for it. So it hit a nerve. People were stood around pressing refresh on Just Giving, and every time they did, a few seconds apart, another £10 donation, another £25 donation. So there was a sort of effect of a kind of snowball rolling down a hill and picking up speed somehow. So it raised that incredible percentage. These are the donations coming into that over the first 5 days of the campaign, up to over 90,000, and obviously it went up a little bit further. Huge, steep climb on that first morning, and still a decent track for a few days as there was more media about it and more people coming on board. That pink line right at the bottom was the target, the original target. So then there was a launch itself. So there was another opportunity. Like we've had some media about the fact that we're going to do this. Then we've had some media about the fact that it raised so much money. Now there's a photo opportunity. We can slap it up on the side of an actual bus, drag Richard Dawkins out, drag Arian Shireen, the comedy writer that wrote the first article out, and have a launch event. So the press are there again, they get to meet interesting people and take interesting photographs, and then it's Richard Dawkins launches There Is No God advert. So that's always a risk. So now it's not the British Humanist Association anymore, it's Richard Dawkins. So organisationally a bit less publicity, but overall great publicity for the campaign. Atheist buses denying God's existence takes streets. So there the Telegraph had to eat its words a bit. All aboard the Atheist Bus campaign, Arian Shireen writing a follow-up piece. This is a fairly well-known Christian churchy blog who didn't really like it very much. They had this cartoon of a bus falling off a cliff. And the Church Mouse said, yes, it's a rubbish slogan from the atheists. We all know that. It's good that people are talking about religion, even if it does start with a negative viewpoint. The power of the web can be used for atheism as well as for the Lord. That was the lessons that they took away from it. So there was lots of discussion about the actual caption. It was on like big news quiz shows, comedy quiz shows, like Have I Got News For You? This is my favourite piece of like atheist bus technology and stuff that was around, because it wasn't us that did this. Someone just said, I'm going to knock up an atheist bus slogan generator, so you can type something in like I did there, hello European Humanist Youth, it says, and it will appear on the picture. So at the time, people were making their own versions and memes and saying, stupid ones, like funny ones, but also genuine like alternatives. Like, I don't like that the word probably is in there, or why doesn't it say gods instead of God? Like so funny things from like picky pedantry to like proper alternative suggestions, and then sharing them on Facebook and stuff. And I've marked up there as well a kind of follow-up campaign that we did a few months later where like we were committed, we had to use most of the atheist bus money on the atheist buses, but there was a small amount left over, which also by the wording of how we'd collected the money had to go on some sort of atheist advertising. So we created the Please Don't Label Me campaign, which was putting this message out from of children like, please don't label me, let me grow up and choose for myself. So it echoed the branding and the caption of the first campaign, and allowed us to again try and get more publicity. And places like the Belfast Telegraph said, Humanist poster stirs up religious storm, mainly from their own newspaper, but that's how things go. I want to talk about the money, because we're talking about growing humanism. Part of that is about the capacity that we have and the resources that we have. At the time, the BHA had less than £1 million income per year. Compare that to someone, just as an arbitrary organisation that's similar interested in human rights, like Amnesty in the UK, has something in the region of 10 million or more, probably much more now, but at the time, in 2009, something like 10 million. And I'm going to shrink both of those points right down so that we can see another comparator, the Church of England, with its approximately £5 billion of value. So this money on the atheist bus campaign, more than £100,000. That's a lot of money. And a lot of members and people would say, really, you're going to spend all that on the buses? Like, you're going to just blow it on adverts? To which there were a few answers. One is that, well, we didn't know that we were going to make that much. We were aiming for £5,000. So partly this wasn't really a decision, it's just something that's happened. But B, it shows how popular this was as an idea, that people wanted to respond to some of the religious negativity on buses, that they wanted to say, I am an atheist, I sponsored that campaign. They wanted to be part of something. So the money reflected that, desire. But from an organizational point of view, you have a difficult problem, because you have a budget that's relatively small, and you've spent a huge amount of money. So there's a whole bunch of, just to make this abundantly clear, there's a whole bunch of people with money getting together, seeing our websites, seeing the social media, talking about it, deciding to give their money to the appeal from the Just Giving and the British Humanist Association, then all that money getting spent on the atheist buses, and then it's gone. Which is a problem if you have a small budget and people want to give you lots of money. So we promoted a message, definitely, and we allowed people to get involved, but what about donors? What about members? What about activists? Well, even though we hadn't really planned ahead and said, this is how we're going to advance this particular campaign, this is how we're going to make something of it, there was a way to get back and to bring some of this in, to bring these people that gave money into the fold. Because having given us some money, having signed up on Just Giving, many of them said, I want to hear more from the organization. They've entered their address, they've entered their email address. They're now, in most cases, they said, tell me more about this campaign, tell me more about what you are doing. So there again are these sort of 4 points on the campaign map: the creation of it, the launch event, the follow-up, please don't label me campaign event. And here is a graph mapped over that of new members of the British Humanist Association. So even before any of the follow-up work is done, you can kind of see that there is membership spikes around each event on that, each media-friendly event anyway. The far left one, that looks a bit weird because the date there for the launch of the campaign itself, there's a spike of membership before it, but that's because the media covering it was before. So that's kind of an important point from this campaign. The actual posters, that's not what generates new members. The media coverage that came before, that did. And just to sort of demonstrate that that's a real trend, if we sort of push that to the side and extend the data back a few years, you can see there a trend line of that's new members per month going up from about 100 up to over 300. Just putting the events back on the timeline there. So you can see that before this whole thing, they were regularly dipping below 50 new members per month, but afterwards, it never went below 100 after the actual launch event. And that went on for a long time. I don't know what the recent membership figures are, but for a long time, it bumped the organization onto a whole new kind of plateau of members. And just to mark up some previous events, those other spikes were the death of the former president of the organization, Linda Smith. So again, there was a huge media traffic spike. She was a very well-loved, very well-liked person, so there was a big outpouring of attention and grief about that, and lots of people joined the organization of which she was the president, and a mailing. So you can see that some of this work that's done for free, that was someone's idea, that was blogged about and talked about and taken advantage of, was as successful as a big expensive mail campaign where you have an initial kind of outlay and an investment that's quite a lot. There were other ways of kind of using money from this. We used Just Giving again to around the time of the launch and said, great, you've given money to the Atheist Bus campaign. Now support our faith schools officer who's working on faith schools all the time. Around the actual launch of the buses onto the streets, we talked about the next stop and did another campaign, which if I had longer, I would talk about how that didn't raise as much, but it raised some to say, you've given to the bus campaign, now give to the rest of our work. And then obviously there's the Please Don't Label Me campaign. And around that, we raised more money for the Faith Schools Officer, because this was again the next year. So we used the branding from the Please Don't Label Me campaign, which effectively people had supported by donating in the first place, to get people to give to that specific campaign. So you can see here, this is income for just don't worry about the numbers, but just to see the proportions on education, ceremonies, membership and groups, campaigns, donations and legacies, so general donations, legacies, sundry kind of income, and then the Atheist Bus. But the Atheist Bus, as we said, is not income because it all got spent on the buses, so we have to get rid of that. But in the first 18 months after the campaign, what we have got is all those new members, all the money from the first Faith Schools campaign, the second Faith Schools campaign, and the Next Stop campaign. So we can stick those back on the top of our graphs and see that actually within 18 months, the Atheist Bus campaign had made for the organisation an amount of money equivalent to what was given on the buses. So this is still, for some reason, like a major example that people give when they talk about good advertising and good media, even though we kind of stumbled on it and someone else came up with the idea, and it was a bunch of humanists going, yeah, okay, we can probably run this. It was something that advertising age, big media organizations were interested in. Just Giving themselves covered this story several times on their blog and wanted to talk about it because it was such a big success for them that they were so involved in it. And they said, so the routes to success can be summarized as prepare to lose a certain amount of control. Don't worry if people are making a bus generator and you're nothing to do with it. It's good. People use an image generator, they post on social media, they talk about it. They'll talk about how your inclusion of the word probably is stupid and they wouldn't have done it like that. That's great, because then at least they're talking about it. Make it easy to share content online. Reach out to bloggers as well as traditional PR and print media. As well as, I think that's important, it's not just the social media. Like the actual mainstream media coverage is also important, but they may not cover something if they don't see social media buzz about it first as well. Enable people to have conversations about your appeal, be prepared to be imaginative and take risks. And they said, clearly the recipe for the success of the Atheist Bus campaign cannot be easily copied, but to provide exactly the same results. But the pointers above show the potential that exists when all these different strands come together to create a true viral online fundraising phenomenon. So last slide, what can we say that this has shown? Well, in the case of this campaign, it was something that was unexpectedly popular, raised a lot more, and was hugely more influential than we imagined. It was provocative in some minor sense, depending on your perception. It was also reactive. I think it would have been different if the initial article hadn't said, I am responding to negative religious adverts, if it was just like a different message that was like, we're going to go out and champion such and such. I think people often find that more difficult. So I think the fact that it was kind of reactive or defensive was probably quite part of its attraction. Massively relied on technology, on social media, on bloggers, on social giving. And as I mentioned, the organization saw significant growth by bringing these new members and donors into the fold. And that's the real lesson of this bit. Like we were talking before about all these ways of trying to organize and plan and set goals, but this was really opportunistic. We made the most of something, but so we can plan, you can have your SMART goals and your SWOT analyses and your long-term strategic plans, but also to grow your organizations, you've got to look for chances, take those chances when they come up, look for volunteers, look for experts who are going to join you, look for the side effects. So there's the campaign itself, it's working, what else can we do with it? What is going to happen as a side effect? Hey, we're going to get loads of email addresses we didn't have before. That's an important side effect. Look for reusage. So like, for example, I talked about the Freedom of Thought report. We took that to other venues. It becomes part of our submission for the United Nations and so on. Look for new allies and sell your story. Whatever you're doing, whatever work is being done, there's probably a media angle, especially because we're like in humanism and atheism and secularism. Like Remus was saying earlier, there's a lot of media interest around religion and atheism, so find an angle that it becomes itself an interesting story for someone else, whatever it is. And I'm done. You can all eat now.